Mhm. Hey everyone. I decided to record this session because, well, I really wanted to talk about it, and I guess we didn't get timings right. So, welcome to the first recording of our space talk. So this is very new to me, so yeah, it might be a little bit hard to get into the start, but hopefully you enjoy it. So, let's get ready to it. So I'm introducing a little bit of a different format in our space, try to make it a little bit more modern, a little bit more approachable for everybody. There will be some women's circles in the upcoming months, but some will be digital, some will be in person. However, we're trying to diversify the content here in our space, and we're starting this new series of our space talk. And the first and the series, or what our space talk difference to our space, is just basically going to be a set of like smaller talks, smaller videos that are topics that that I find interesting. In by no shapes or form am I a professionally trained sexologist or a psychologist, or in any shape or form have I like any professional credentials in any of these. The only thing that I do have is my own experience as a woman, and that I have studied media, and I also love the way we can debunk certain processes and ideas on sexuality, sex, women, and love. So here we are today, exactly talking about the topic about let's talk sex, love, and women. In this title might actually come to all of you, or it might even touch base on all of you differently. It is very open and catchy name, but the way that I'm going to approach it is actually based on my own personal experience, and actually talking about um, an explicit honesty and why did this come to be. But before we get into that, this would want to be part of like a Q&A series, but because I tend to not get the timings right, we're just going to make this like a video. And then when you watch the video and you have any questions, send a message through group chat or on you can also send it on the YouTube. This will be, I guess, our first YouTube video out there. Crazy. Um, No, we'll see how it works. Hopefully, next time we can get more of an interactive thing. But for now, for the next 15 to 20 minutes, it's gonna be me and the list box. I don't know if I don't know where I am, but hopefully you get it. Okay. Anyway, without any further ado, let's get started. So, what came to be and why did I want to talk about sex, love, and women? Well, it actually came mostly based on a personal experience. A couple of weeks ago, I was sitting in my bed, and I was having a little bit of a low moment, and I was not really feeling myself and was not really feeling embodied and aligned with myself. And, I was just really in my head. And I was thinking, like, when was the last time that I actually felt connected with my body, my mind, my spirit, everything aligned? And it was actually during sex. And then I started thinking, like, most of the time when most of the time when I'm having sex with my partner, um, I start to question, like, I feel so alive, I feel so embodied, and I'm so connected. And I'm like, but then when I have self-intimacy sessions, it doesn't feel quite the same. So there was a question that arose, and I was like, what if there's a feeling that's beyond me? What if I feel this energy? And what if I kind of lose it when I just dedicate it to myself? Because maybe do I even feel worthy of sharing that sexual energy with myself? And that kind of started me thinking, why can I give it to others? Well, I'm in a monogamous relationship, so how can I give it only to my partner, but not necessarily to myself whenever I need it? And then it kind of started to answer its own question when I started to realize the dependency that I had with the sexual act, and how again, it wasn't about shaming myself. It was just noticing these clues, and it actually gave me an insight on this big gap between this idea of sex for others and this idea of sex for ourselves. And now, when I mean sex, I don't just mean, obviously, there is the performative aspect. Sorry. Of course, there is this the sexual intercourse. There is that as sex, and then there is also sex as female or male. However, and other sexes. However, when I'm really talking about sex today, I'm really talking about the difference between how we engage in any sort of sexual interaction with others and then with ourselves. So it's how it is, how we embody it with others, and there's a level of performativity. This does not discredit any level of intimacy or love that one might feel towards their partner, but it's definitely not the same, at least when it came to me, than the level of sex with yourself in terms of like being private, being unwitnessed, and being truly yours. How does that energy change and how does that translate into ourselves? These were the questions I was asking myself. And I was wondering, what would it feel like if we actually close that gap? What would we gain from that? And in my mind, there was this answer. It was freedom. Freedom from what, right? Freedom from others, freedom from ourselves, freedom from an expectation. So this is what we're going to dive into. So let's get into it. Sexual energy is not what they have told us. Okay. I firmly believe that we have been sold the idea that as women, as well as men, that sexual energy should be and has been labeled or has been framed through the male gaze. As a media scholar and a filmmaker, I absolutely understand how the male gaze has been worked and has worked as a gaze and as a framing standpoint for us to actually look at ourselves, specifically women, um, through the point of sex has to be seductive, even performative, and sometimes even quoted as low-level desires. If you are, um, if you are sexually engaged or you are into any sort of, if you are a woman who is outspoken about sex, about her sexuality, about her own body, about wanting someone else and having desires, throughout the past, it has been condoned as a low-level desire by different religious institutions, also literally banning and also shaming women. So shame is a very big concept that has been used throughout the centuries and throughout different institutions, even you would be surprised, maybe even film. A couple years back, not even too long ago, less than 60 years ago, um, film had very strict levels of censorship. And actually, if there was a film that was actually portraying a woman who embodied their sexual energy, so um, if she was not married and she was single and she was able to have multiple men, or it doesn't mean that, owning your sexuality is by having intercourse with multiple people, but it's more about a sort of liberation. It was a way that a woman could exist being single of outside of the space um of the marriage, and that she could actually find herself and that she was happy. So it was actually censorship in the 60s and 50s that a woman in a film that was portrayed as having sexual liberty and was not killed at the end of the story or was not in some way punished um uh was just not deemed correct for the public. And one of the pioneers you could say the feminist movement in terms of film or in terms of like trying to unstigmatize this, how a woman can actually take sexual prowess, again, not by having multiple partners, but feeling good in herself. Was exactly what the moral dynamic was. The censorship people said, the people in these big organizations of censorship in France, in the UK, all over America as well, specifically in Europe, we're saying the problem is that it's not that she can be with multiple men, it's that she's not punished at the end as being immoral. And here's where I started to understand. Immorality and shame is a big factor that keeps women and keeps a lot of um, female identifying people stuck in not being able to reclaim their power because it goes against the system. A very good film recommendation for a very niche but brilliant film that I discovered in French called La fiancée du pirate. And it's by this amazing feminist director, Nellie Klubman, I believe. Let me just double check that because I'm not gonna tell you guys like stupid things, but c'est du pirate. Nelly. Yeah, Nelly Kaplan. I have just discovered her. Ironically, my grandma told me about her. And La fiancée du pirate really just talks about it's one of the few stories that in the 60s was made without punishing the woman and having her own sense of liberty and sexual prowess. But yeah, so how do we so film is an example, but um there's many other examples that exist within media, within the world, within own personal experience that that just connects with that. But I'm into film, I'm in film, so this is this is how I relate to it. So so if we're talking about that, yeah, and then we move on to the idea of what would it be if sex is not portrayed by the male gaze and it's actually looked upon through a life force, and it's looked upon how and it's actually framed in such a way that having sexual alignment is actually linked more to the idea of being creative, of being present, of having power over themselves. So it changes the ball completely because we're no longer in a space of being watched and being having to perform to being a certain and playing the role of seductress or playing the role of performativity. Um, it's actually, wait, we actually become more aligned with ourselves because we actually change the focus, or we change the lens from an outwardly experience to an inwardly experience, which becomes much more intense. And if I can be honest, much more interesting. Um, so here's where everything changes from going from a dirty and low and dangerous kind of experience through the male gaze, right? If because it's claimed dirty and dangerous, if it's not claimed by the man, if it's not claimed, if the performativity or if the woman who is acting seductive and is dressing a certain way and is playing a certain role does not and she does not cater towards a man, then it is considered dangerous, dirty, low, and promiscuous and dangerous. And this is where we're going. And this is where it has all been misdirected. And um misdirected because then it it doesn't allow us, or it just completely tries to convince us that inwardly and having that sex cannot mean creative presence and power, because how could they? Because if we did and they convinced us of it, or they allowed us to believe that, they could not monetize. And here is where things get extremely interesting. there's an actual benefit from why we don't talk about sex, love, and women, and why the subject is so taboo, and why claiming and reclaiming that energy and that being is actually in the system's favor because we live in a capitalist system. And by living in a capitalist system, they monetize the idea of feeling nearly enough. And nearly enough is linked to the idea of beauty and the wellness industry that profits about women feeling almost enough sexually. If she just bought this one product, she would just be it. Almost enough to be desirable if she just buys that one dress, or if she buys those shoes, or if she buys this purse. Almost as elegant or almost as we are enough. And this is the biggest lie that they don't want us to know. It is taboo that actually living it by living within yourselves and actually being enough is a threat. And it's a quiet threat because a woman who is sexually alive for herself, not for others, right? This is where the dynamic changes, cannot be for anyone's consumption. Are we noticing here the patterns? If you are radically aligned with yourself and you turn the switch and you turn the lens again inwardly and we don't look outwardly, you cannot be commercialized. You cannot be consumed. And in a world where everything is consumed and capitalized, I think this is the most radical thing any woman slash any man can do for themselves. Or anybody, just in general, anybody should do because it's so threatening because you cannot be sold back to yourself. Can't be sold the idea that you can be better or that you're not enough. Just it's like no, you are enough. So what are you gonna be sold? You're a threat to the system. And I think it is really important to know that an even more radical experience, right? Is queerness when it comes to sex, love, and women. Because the moment we talk and we introduce queerness into the space, the male gaze completely and utterly has gone out of the chat, like out of the conversation. They're not there. And what happens if the man is not there or the heterosexual frames that we've been given within this institution are not there anymore? One could argue that um, this is now a space where people and women specifically can now put their desire on their own terms. And a lot of studies have shown that same-sex relationships tend to have higher levels of satisfaction throughout a long period of time than heterosexual ones. Not to say that the solution is to be queer, but I'm just saying that there is a clear relationship in exploring queerness throughout yourself and with other people, and a newfound level of intimacy with yourself and the other person. So I noticed that we're going a little bit we've gone maybe a little bit fast, but I want to acknowledge a couple points quickly before we end because I don't want this to be like super long. But a lot of people, and I think myself, but another question was like, okay, well, um, I can, most times I feel sexy when I'm like, putting a certain type of clothes or I'm bathing myself, taking care of myself, or I'm with my partner and I'm having, a minute, or I'm having my intimate session with myself. However, there's time throughout the month that I notice that, I'm not really feeling too much myself or like too like sexually energy like in my luteal phase. And let alone during my menstrual cycle. So I was like, all great and everything you want, but what if I don't, when do I actually feel like this ignition of sexual energy is within me? And actually, I noticed ovulation. And so this made me understand that there's a rhythm. And unlike, biologically, s male sexed individuals have a different hormonal rhythm than female sexual individuals because we go in different systems. A man still has uh, these individuals uh, have. Um, a different sexual hormonal cycle because it tends to be in 24 hours, hence why the days are 24 hours, and we have different that's why, ironically, the days are structured like that. Maybe I'll make a new episode on that furthermore. But then women, we have a monthly cycle. In short, why is that interesting? Why is that relevant? Actually, it makes the world of a difference because we cannot deny biology when it comes to our body's sexual energy activation because it's not linear. And I think a lot of the time, there's even more shame stigmatized around women because we are not linear beings, we are circular. And that is not a flaw, if anything, that is a feature of who we are, and that is actually a superpower. Because we have a lot of the time I thought, okay, if I'm not in my ovulation phase, my sexual desire, my sexual energy is out the window, right? Like it's just out. However, it's always there, but it's just changing. And we shouldn't go against our hormones or against our cycles. We should go with them, and we should actually accompany them because they are what they make us who we are. And so I think that was really important, right? Is to understand that hormones are real, and understanding your hormone cycle is actually one of the best things you can do for your health and for yourself. Um, and this process called cycle thinking. So if you're interested in it, I'll make a different video on it. I've been starting myself, and a lot of things have changed for me, so keep tuned for that. But so yeah, so the most important part in this section is to understand that the energy exists across the entire cycle. So when you're in your menstrual cycle, ironically, some women feel or some people feel that they have a very high libido because that's how they want to they just feel a very high libido within themselves, which can be the case. I do not know the scientific hormones behind that, but has to do with the level of progesterone going up, I think. Don't quote me on that. But then follicular phase, but then there's other women that, excuse me, have the most painful experiences during their during menstruation. And if you talk to them about any sort of sex or any sort of sexual intimacy, that idea just completely gets dismissed. Um, And no wonder, right? We're going through a very harsh time, and some people feel some people have more painful periods than others and more debilitating. So, everything is in its own, we have our cycle, but then like women's have their cycles, but then you have your own cycle. So understand yourself, right? And it's to understand, but it's super important to understand that it's not because you have like low libido does not equal like the level of your sexual energy, if that makes sense. Because I want to really demystify the idea that sex is for others. In this talk, if you get anything, sex is for yourself. Sex, love, women is for yourself. Okay, love yourself, and like by loving yourself, which we're going into the next one, has to do, and I really do believe has to do and is linked to your sexual energy towards yourself, because I think knowing your cycle is so important because it gives you self-knowledge. And if you have self-knowledge, you can self-care of yourself. And if you self-care, it's self-love and it's all connected. So my invitation here is that instead of just accepting, oh, okay, well, there's some periods of time where I feel more sexy, and it's not just about feeling sexy, but I feel like this more sexual energy in the room, and others not, and I'll just leave it at that. Be curious about yourself. Be curious about, you know, why are you feeling this? Ask those big questions. How can I uh revere my sexual energy in every stage of my cycle? How can I meet halfway with it? Because then if you're able to do that, you're able to call on it, and you're able to actually um some people would say exploit. I would just say actually benefit from your sexual energy, because your sexual energy actually gives you self-authorship. And I would go as far as to say that person who is um who is in tune with themselves on a sexual level and who is able to connect with themselves in that way and knows themselves because again, it takes self-knowledge. They rock up to work in a whole different energy. The way they show up for their relationships, that being romantic or friendships, totally different. The way that they show up for themselves, completely radical and life-changing. The way that they show up for their body, their mind, their spiritual energy, completely different. And it doesn't matter if you believe, if you, a person believe, like it doesn't matter what religion you believe in, because you can tailor this however it is for you. And sexuality, it's not about showing more skin. Um, it's not about how, again, it's not about showing it performatively because that is not sexual energy that is framed for yourself. That is on the male gaze, that's outwardly. And of course, you can have those moments, but this talk is about the inward experience. What are you doing for yourself? I think that's super important because that gives you self-authorship and self-power, reclaiming that. And again, we've gone through a lot of topics, but then what I think I cannot go without saying self-pleasure. And this is one of the most taboo topics anyone in the female circle or I've talked to, I'm a woman, I talk to all, my friends, my circles, and most of them are female. Um, most of them are, you know, of my friends are female presenting female beings. So it's like, whenever I talk about self-pleasure, the room gets quiet. Nobody wants to talk about it. It's like, oh my God, what kind of energy are you inviting in? It's like, what if we talk about this casually between people, but also like being part of a self-care process? And this is why I'm attempting, right? Let's not talk about performativity, okay? Let's not talk about, because, many people think, oh, self-pleasure, that's why they see in porn, right? And they have to, like be loud and do a certain kind of way and it's certain. That is again for the male gaze. That is again for the patriarchal society. That is not for you. Let's take that lens from outward to inward. Yeah. And when we do that, we actually notice a gap. Again, that gap that I was telling you about at the start. It's not about love or attraction. It is actually a gap of attention. And this is all I'm trying to say is like by talking about this, we're bringing back attention, awareness, presence to this experience. And by talking about it, we might not solve all issues, but we're starting to talk about them. And if we start to talk about them, we actually enter a space of wanting to become better and trying to, again, self-knowledge equals self-authorship. Remember that. Um, and yeah, so I started to discover through my conversations with other people, with myself, with family, friends, with a partner, even, there was a gap in attention for how they self-pleasured and how I self or how we women self-pleasured. And throughout the media, masturbation is 99% of the time equated to male self-pleasure. It is not, and if ever, related to female pleasure self-pleasure. Again, that is due to multiple factors, but a big one is shame and stigma. So maybe just by talking about this and even just watching this video, uh you're already deconstructing I would even argue your own misogyny against yourself, for believing that, oh, can I or can I not have self-pleasure? Like, absolutely. And I encourage you, and if you don't like self-pleasure, it's because you've not explored it enough, and because you've not had those hard conversations with yourself and asked yourself the why, and you've not, gotten that gap, you've not closed it because you're not paying attention to it, because it's there. And even if, because I have people who have told me, okay, what if I am asexual? What if I actually don't feel sexual desire? Or I would say, again, I am not a psychologist. I am not a gender studies professional. I am not you. But I encourage you to ask yourself these questions, regardless. And again, there's a big level of asexuality has to do with others. So I encourage you to ask yourself the radical question towards yourself. Do I feel, or do I even give the space to sexual energy in my life? If there's even space in it, do I even think about it? What would happen if I actually start thinking about it? Would my creativity rise? Would my relationship with other people improve? Will my relationship with myself improve? And this is where we get into the last part. And that is loving yourself without judgment, but also rituals of love. I will make a whole separate video on rituals of love because I think that it is so important, but it's deeply connected to sex and love in women because self-care has been framed in so many different ways throughout the years with different movements. But I would say that if that that self-care should not be performative. Self-care should not be about how it looks for others, but how it feels for you. It has to be based on sensation and presence. Presence is the key when it comes to self-care because self-care can be millions of different things, but I personally believe that the ultimate form or the ultimate definition of self-care is presence towards the self. And that can take the shape of bathing, so slowing things down, bathing, dressing, like although these can be argued some level of performativity, but dressing for yourself, not dressing for others. Did you have this investing in long-term fabrics that are gonna last a long time and that you find pleasurable and that you have found and dedicated time and space to finding your own style, to finding what actually feels good on you. And, when you walk out the door, do you feel, hey, I look good. I actually feel good with myself. That's a level of self-care. Movement. I think this is one that I underappreciate the most, and this is very important in my journey. Movement is one of the biggest forms of self-care. You can take that as exercise, you can take that as yoga, whatever you want to describe it, but movement to keep your body in movement. That is mind, body, and soul. Because if you keep moving your energy, if you keep moving, your energy changes and flows with you. But if you are stagnant, that be in body, speech, and thought. So in body, that can be like you don't really move your body, so you're just sitting all day in front of your computer, you're editing or you're working on your job, and you don't really like go for a little walk or simply as just getting up, 5 minute break, 5 minute stretch. If you are stagnant physically, your energy is stagnant as well. And in your mind, or you're able to escape your mind. Well, I think we all have those days where we're really in our thoughts. Can we actually introduce movement into that? Can we actually try to encourage that body and mind connection again and trying to move that energy, right? So we can be stagnant with our thoughts. So again, let's bring that movement in. And I feel like when we bring that in, that is a level of self-care. And essentially what I mean by self-care has to come from a space of devotion. No, no, no. Wait, no, no, no. Okay, okay, me. Um, sorry, that was my grandma. But I'll try now. But yeah, the whole idea has to be with devotion with yourself and your body, okay? And let's talk about finally the whole idea of how devotion can be and is, I would argue, synonymous to self-care, but it takes it to a different level because um it takes your own body um as an erotic and a spiritual act. So being in your body is actually an erotic and radical act and a spiritual one, just by being within it and feeling it. But it shouldn't be a productive one, right? Because again, if we become productive space all the time, we become commercial and therefore we become disconnected from ourselves. So I think that choosing self-pleasure and choosing pleasure rather than an audience is actually and not wanting any purpose rather than just it makes sense for me. Because a lot of people are like, oh, but like, what if this doesn't make sense for it? It doesn't matter. Does it make sense for you? Awesome. You don't even have to tell anybody else. But however, I do encourage you to be able to have these conversations with your peers, with your friends, even your family, and even your partner if you do. But even be more curious and have these, the most important is to have these conversations with yourself. To be true with it. And lastly, what I would say is the hardest part is, and this is why love is in the mix in the talk, is to love without judgment. And I will say this again, to love without judgment is the hardest part of this entire journey, on any journey that you embark, but to not be attached to the value of your body because it is constantly changing and it is constantly being tried to be compared throughout all sorts of social media, people, ideas themselves, mirroring, portray like projecting, people projecting on you. So I encourage you to detach yourself and to actually detach yourself from judgment because um actually nobody really cares. We're not all that special. So and that can be the biggest gift because if we're not that special and nobody cares, just be the person that cares about yourself. Be the person that shows up for you because again, nobody cares enough to judge you. And if they do care enough to judge you, that says more about them than it says about you. So again, detaching from that judgment, but specifically detaching from the judgment that you have to yourself, because I think this is the hardest part. Most of the time, judgment doesn't come from other people, but it comes from ourselves. And I think that's the hardest truth to like actually swallow is that we are our biggest critics. So let's detach let's detach our judgment from ourselves and actually learn to love ourselves, our bodies, and our own knowing experience as a human being. Okay. Um, love yourself as a person is the most important thing. And I think that curiosity, patience, forgiveness, um, and um, and being there for yourself is the most important part. I genuinely believe that. And through curiosity, um, and no judgment can come from that because you're curious about yourself. Start to become, when was the last time you were curious about yourself? So become curious about yourself again, okay? And I think that is in a whole different way that's being intimate with yourself, okay? So I'm gonna leave you with a couple questions, okay? To just sit with yourself and answer them whenever you want, or some journal prompts for those girlies who do. It's when do you feel seen? When do you feel the most seen by yourself? When was the last time you felt seen by yourself? Not by others, but by yourself. Can you be intimate with yourself and the way that can you be intimate with yourself? Answer that question in whatever shape or form it comes to you. I'm curious about your answers, but can you be intimate with yourself? And when you connect with your body and your desires, do you move differently? Is desire for you, what does desire mean for you? Pleasure. What do those things mean? Because a lot of people might attach them to lust, but then again, are you able to connect with these topics without judgment, without moral constraints or framing? Are you able to? And just sit with it, and just be present with it. And can you stop outsourcing your aliveness to others? This is a very hard question to understand, but without taking too much more time, it is about the concept of how is aliveness, sexual energy all connected with itself? And how does being alive, how is it even connected to life force and to sexual energy? Is sexual energy synonymous to life force? We might discover that, or we might talk about that in the next video. And how can connecting with your sexual self, with being with yourself and connecting with yourself on this energy playing field actually impact the quality of presence in your relationships and becoming more full with yourself and with others? How can you feel more full as an individual and whole-rounded with inviting this energy and befriending this energy? And how is it linked to your creativity and love? So my ending statement would be that the most I think, and this is what I would say, is that here in our space we try to look at radical spaces and creativity specifically, but I think that the most radical version of yourself or being with yourself is very simple. I think that it is actually being in alignment with your body and not trying to find it as a problem, but actually as something to be lived in and to be fully present and pleasurably free. I think that nobody is going to give that to you except yourself. So that's the end of the talk, everybody. Thank you so much. And I invite you to send me questions either in the YouTube chat or if you're part of our community on our WhatsApp group. And stay tuned for the rest. This was a bit long, but hopefully you can stay with me and you enjoyed our first Our Space talk. So thank you so much. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.